That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
Think differently and embrace change. Think differently and embrace change.
Yeah.
It's just been kind of one of my talking points for a long time because, outside the box is where many people, particularly first generation people like myself, have had to live. Because if you're inside the box, arguably you don't exist. There's no roadmap for you. There's no path, in many cases, unless you begin to carve and cut out a path.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is Darrell Miller, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hey, Darrell, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Merle. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. So let me just tell folks a little bit about you. There's so much to tell, but I'm going to keep it brief, right? Darrell is a partner and the founding chair of the Entertainment and Sports Law Department at Fox Rothschild. Congratulations are in order. He was recently, I think, reappointed as managing partner of the LA office, correct? I feel
Absolutely.
like you've been that before.
You're absolutely right. I was the managing partner before the current managing partner, and I was that for 5 years and built out our current space. So you're absolutely right. I've done it one time before, and this is my second time.
Great. See, I've been stalking you for a while, Darrell. Darrell is from Cincinnati, where he attended undergrad and studied musical theater and classical voice, which I find fascinating. And also, I believe, toured professionally before attending Georgetown Law. What did I miss?
Well, that's a big, nice, wonderful summation, which is the one that's always a curveball for people because they always go from how did you stop becoming an artist and now you're like a lawyer? So no, you didn't miss a whole lot. Right. I was an artist for a good part of my life and up until the day I walked into law school, and I've been a lawyer since the day I walked into law school.
Interesting. And so I have to ask, because I have a daughter who was a musical theater kid at Harvard Westlake and performed at the Fringe in Edinburgh. And, I was that parent who was following her around when she was doing all those things. And now she's a writer, so she stopped performing also. But how did it feel to make that transition? Was it easy, or was it something that was hard for you to do?
Well, definitely was not easy. And it was interesting because I did it all secretly. I did it all at the height of my performance career. I did it all after a world tour, throughout India and Sri Lanka and Egypt and Europe. I kind of did it thinking about how could I leverage my success in the arts into something bigger, and was just dreaming about the idea of not only doing something bigger, but generating money so I would take more control of my destiny. Mm-hmm. And I was just this wide-eyed kid, literally dreaming, having found a bunch of success as a young performer. And I quietly did it. So it was very, very hard because I didn't think, they don't condition you to believe that you can make that kind of transition in our society. And I didn't have any big cheerleaders because every time I would raise it to someone, they would basically say, "You're going to do what?
Right.
You're not going to continue. You're not going to continue." So, but it was hard nonetheless because it was something that, was unforeseen. There were no lawyers in my family. It was, there was nobody pushing me into it. A lot of times people go, "Oh, you got to stop singing. You're not successful. You better pick a career." I literally did it as a means to get a degree to, be a more powerful person within the world of entertainment. So I just kind of like I self-imposed a very hard, demanding challenge in my life, and I just overcame it. And it made me a monster I am, because at the end of the day, it was the essence of self-motivation over for something that was truly challenging.
And so, and I kind of skipped. I usually, and that is fascinating. So I need to know what the tour was, what you were doing, but I also want to know, and I usually ask this first. Give us a little idea about your story. Kind of people I talk to usually have there's something about how they were raised or who raised them or teachers or somebody who saw something in them or didn't that caused them or allowed them to choose their path. What is that for you?
I that could be our whole podcast. So I'm going to try to give you, I'm going to try to give you what I call the Hollywood 1 minute version, because it truly is a lot of twists and turns and things. And there were some key people that I'll highlight, but I'll tell you a great driver of a lot of it, in a very, very simple way, was just kind of faith. And I was, a very driven kid, around 9 or 10 years old, who got into the church with through my grandmother and mom. And I just remember being in the choir and working really hard, being one of the first kids tithing, and just believing in faith and believing that ultimately, faith, and just myself and faith and work and working diligently academically would all kind of lead to something. That's kind of all I had. I mean, in a nutshell, coming from Cincinnati, I grew up in a blue collar, kind of very limited, community, which is, kind of your traditional community in the Midwest, where you live and die within a 3-mile radius of your school, your church, and your place of work. And, still 90% of my family, or 95, let me be realistic, are pretty much there in that same cycle. I was in that cycle, never dreamt about being outside of that cycle, and was just living my life. And so living my life through the arts, as I said, I was kind of, I grew up in the hotbed of the Midwestern R&B bands of the 70s. And so I was performing and doing that stuff. I grew up in church, singing gospel music and doing that whole thing. And then at one point, deciding between junior high school and high school, I decided to go to the School for Creative and Performing Arts. And I got into that school as a drummer. I was a percussionist. Wow. And started a career and started a life, and just had doors and my eyes opened in ways that I just never imagined. I was in a predominantly Black neighborhood for a good part of my life, up to the point I walked into that school. And then I walked into a high school, where its model and its colors were black and white. And it was really a kind of experimental school funded by the Cincinnati public school system, but it was a specialty school, an experiment where they were pulling together kids based on their talent, not based on their geographical locations, not based on their, economic capacity, but based on their talent. So they had poor kids, rich kids, white kids, Black kids, straight kids, gay kids, all kind of in this melting pot around the achievement of arts. And I went in as a drummer and came out as a singer. And after, being trained to start singing, I ended up literally thinking I would just, have a great high school experience. I escaped gangs, I escaped drugs, I escaped all the stereotypes that young African-American men even then were forced to deal with. And I just thought I'd go to the factory line at Ford, or one of the kind of, staff jobs that, typically get, and you can live a good life back then, getting your standard job in the Midwest and, living your life happily ever after. But the first person that, kind of really made a change, I think, was this school counselor, Gwen Fields. I never forget Miss Fields, who basically said, young man, I know you've worked really hard and you've done all this other stuff, but do you know you can go to college?
Wow.
And She, African American counselor, looking out, picked me up and just said, you can go to college and I want you to think about these places. And, you've done well enough where you should be thinking. And she really opened my eyes to the idea of going to college. Nobody that I remember around me in college. My dad was a military guy of 30 years. I did have one uncle that went and did Procter and Gamble, but I wasn't really close to him, so I didn't really know his path. But a counselor opened the door for me thinking beyond that. I ended up, applying to multiple colleges and getting into one and going to the College Conservatory of Music, a very prestigious, highly selective college, which is sort of like the Juilliard of the Midwest, if you will. And
Awesome.
I got into their musical theater program, which is how I was there. And I wanted to continue studying my classical voice because for me, having a well-trained voice meant I can sing everything from gospel to R&B, to classics to musical theater, as opposed to just trying to only sing theater, which is really more caricature than, having a good voice. So I did that, went on to college. Now I found myself in college and, in my sophomore year of college, everybody's auditioning for summer jobs. So I joined the herd and I ended up landing a job at the Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera in Heinz Hall in Pittsburgh, and ended up doing like 8 shows for the summer, making a salary and going crazy and, having a great time and coming back. And for the next 3 years, from my sophomore, junior, and senior year, I spent my summers, and I think I ended up doing maybe 25, 26 shows and in Pittsburgh. The last show I did, I'm graduating now. The last show I did was Guys and Dolls with Maureen McGovern and Tony Roberts. And they take the show on the road, and I'm like, I'm on the road doing a show. And that coincided with me graduating college in '85. And at the end of that show, everybody's saying, hey, what are you going to do? I want to go to Broadway. So we all moved to New York to go to Broadway, So
what are you going to do now? You're not going to Disneyland. You're going to Broadway.
I'm going to Broadway. And so I go to Broadway. I did everything from auditioning for Debbie Allen in the Broadway production of Carrie. I remember the horror movie that she turned into a musical. I auditioned for Bob Fosse's last musical called The Big Deal. I auditioned I did a one-man jazz opera off Broadway, and I ended up landing a couple of tours. The first tour, one of my college professors wanted to go to the Soviet Union then. The curtain had not fallen. And he put together a group of people. I was invited, and we ended up taking a kind of a repertoire of American music, from standards to classics to musical theater, all over, and performing throughout Moscow, Warsaw, Poland, and up in St. Petersburg. So I got to Russia. This, again, my first time out of the country. Right. I'm standing in Russia and insanely. Now I'm like going, oh, my God. Remember, this 3-mile radius that I can't even tell people like what it's like standing on the streets of Russia because, we couldn't even fathom it. But I'm here doing it. And it just lit a flame. It lit a fire inside of me to want to do more. But when that was over, I went back to New York, continued to do my thing. And I ultimately performed in or around New York, and then got a second tour. They were auditioning for this tour that was going to be co-funded and co-produced by the United States Cultural Affairs Department and the Minnesota Opera Company. Often the Cultural Affairs Department, and we do this to this day, I think it's just, I don't know if that the division has been shut down, but at this point there's still a division within our U.S. government that kind of sends musical performers, usually a pianist or a flautist or a violinist or just one singer around the world to perform as a diplomat to improve the relations between the U.S. and various foreign countries.
Interesting.
Well, this particular year, led by the passion of the artistic director of the Minnesota Opera Company, they had a vision of taking a full-blown American musical abroad. And they wanted to say, not just take one person, not just take two. We want to take sets, costumes, lights, a full cast, and everything, and do a musical in a foreign territory as a means of fostering relationship and engaging and fellowshipping, around the arts. And they auditioned in New York City, and I won a position in this play. It was a musical, actually. And it was a musical called Once Upon a Mattress, the story of the Princess and the Pea. Carol Burnett starred in it on Broadway, if you know the piece at all. And we rehearsed and mounted it all in New York City, put it together in New York City, and had sets, costumes, lights. And we open up in Bombay, India, now Mumbai.
Wow.
We go to Madras in the south. We go to Calcutta. We go to the capital, New Delhi. We go to the beautiful Bangalore with all its flowers. We then go down into Sri Lanka, right off of India, and perform in Ceylon, the capital. We go up into the hills of Kandy. And then it just was this insanely crazy life experience. And I'll never forget standing in Bombay, because I didn't even have to do the rest of the tour. It's just the fact that my little Cincinnati butt was standing on the shores of Chowpatty Beach in Bombay, looking out at the sea, and honestly just going, dear Lord, if you got me this far, how far can you take me? If I'm doing this with just performing and doing this now, and again, this is my job, so I was paid a salary, I was flown business class, I'm here as a diplomat. It was like, how can I possibly parlay this into something that, is as exciting for the rest of my life as it is in this moment?
So let me ask you this. What did the folks back home think of all this?
I was a star. Can you imagine this kid that you grew up with from this little black neighborhood who's now living and traveling and getting a call or getting a card or hearing that Darrell's in India? I mean, so I was literally championed and loved, I think, and supported by all of my family and my friends who were just like, my God, I mean, the dream of performing and earning a living is what every artist really has. And so not only was I, as a young man, earning a living, I'm now internationally performing and touring in the process of that living. So it was really, truly just kind of this motivating thing that, the more I did, the more I wanted to do, that just kept pushing me from the next thing to the level. Now, as I said, standing on that beach, looking out, thinking, there's a harsh reality for every artist that I live and understand to this day. There's a harsh reality for the industry, which is inevitable, is that you're only as good as your last production, right? You're only as good as your last performance. When it's over, and it all starts over again.
Right.
And, we know that in the corporate world when the company is sold or when a company shuts down. But in the performance world, when that show is over, you start all over again. And so fundamentally, there was a practical side of me that said, how can I prevent this from just starting all over again and waiting for people to hire me or to get me to do something? How can I be the initiator as opposed to the one constantly waiting for someone else to decide some wonderful exotic thing? And I said, not only that, how can I make some money and put some of these things in motion? And I genuinely wanted to produce international cultural exchange productions like the one I was on. And I said, that could be for the rest of my life. I could travel the world improving the relations between the arts. So those were just kind of the seeds planted at that time. And I thought about it. But I said, everybody would go, artists don't go to school. Artists don't do this. You're just an artist. So I secretly, after that tour, came back to the U.S., continued to audition, landed a production of a revival of the musical Carnival that was supposed to go to Broadway. We rehearsed and put that together at the Goodspeed Opera House in East Haddam, Connecticut. I think still to this day, the oldest wooden opera house in America.
I've heard of it, yeah.
That's where Man of La Mancha started. Annie started. A bunch of beautiful classical American musicals all started there. We were reviving Carnival and going to take it to Broadway. Well, again, I'm just living my life. But I think everybody's going to think I'm crazy. Everybody's going to think I'm a fool. So I secretly pursue my plan. Only two of my closest buddies knew what I was doing. And one to this day jokes with me and laughs with me because, he distinctly remembers, and we joke about this all the time, us sitting around the table in our little, one by one apartment in New York City playing poker. And I keep going, hold guys for a second. I'll be right back. My application is printing out. I got to get this thing together.
Well, you have to take the LSAT first.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I'm in Carnival. I'm in the production at the Goodspeed Opera House. And remember, I'm doing all my rehearsal, and now we only perform for 2 hours a night. as the performances started, I was driving hour or so south down to New Haven, Connecticut, and taking the Stanley Kaplan LSAT prep course.
I took Stanley Kaplan. It was great. It was great.
I was secretly taking this. I paid my own little money. This is all secret. People don't even know what it was. I researched it. I figured it out. I took Stanley Kaplan. And then I went at the end, as we closed the production, I think the week we were closing, I took the LSAT exam at Wellesley College, right there in Connecticut.
Okay.
And I took the course, I took the exam and closed the book on the exam. The production closed. Then I went back to New York, Manhattan, and was waiting for the Broadway show to be picked up or my results to come back. Right. And I ultimately got my results. And then the next phase was to apply to college and apply to law schools. And again, I think people would think I'm out of my mind. And I applied to 12 schools thinking I'll apply to schools that have to take me, schools that may take me, and schools that probably will never take me, but I'm still applying to them. So I had my options from the University of Cincinnati Law School to Harvard, among the 12, and I applied to all 12 and ended up getting into 9 of those 12 schools.
Amazing.
And it was just, again, sort of like standing on those shores, having another door open and kind of going, what? Are you serious? Georgetown Law Center in Washington, D.C. was not one of the 12. Georgetown Law Center, the dean of admissions, I remember, reached out to me and said, we'd love for you. We've heard about you. We'd love for you to consider coming to Georgetown. Just please complete our application and submit it. We'd like you to consider us. And at that time, again, law school, and the price of applications, and all this other stuff. I blow my wad, blow my money. And I was like, I got 9 offers in my hand, and you asking me to come to you? Why should I even do it? But I said, what the heck? I already got all the data in my computer. Let me just complete it. But I'll never forget, true story, Merle. On the application fee section, they basically say, put in the fee. And if you cannot afford the fee, give us a reason why. And I completed the application, and I really was truly broke. I'm surviving in New York. I'm doing my thing. I'm not like rolling. I'm surviving in New York. And so what do I write on that application? To this day, I literally said my reason for not being able to pay the application fee is I am surviving in New York, period.
That's great.
Shipped it off. And got admitted, one of 16 in the fall class 1987 into Georgetown. So I had a 10th acceptance, in that process, which is crazy.
Well, that's one of the things, speaking of, you're surviving in New York and making it. Think about the juxtaposition of this story that you just told us. You were a star. You're traveling all over the world. This is like your dream and every other performance person's dream, right? To be able to do this. But then by the same token, you're just surviving. And that's what people don't see, I think, and in your current position where you represent all these performers and, probably from cradle to grave, like from beginning to, when they're kind of nobody to when they're great, how does that help you to have had that experience and then be able to help them understand what they should be doing with their career?
Well, I think you have to totally appreciate to have stood in the shoes, to have walked the walk, to have been in the very position that an artist finds themselves in, and often a business person who's never really done it, maybe did it a couple of times in high school and then went off to political science or economics and then got the law degree. But to have actually stood around and been part of productions and been part of shows and been part of those various things, and again, said the life cycle of, I'm in Russia, now you're unemployed. I'm in India, now you're unemployed.
Right,
I'm on Broadway, and now you're unemployed.
Right.
To have that as the kind of foundation of who I, was at the time I couldn't have thought of a better education for being an advocate for artists or being an advocate in the world of the arts, where things are just by their very nature, on a very short cycle, right? A movie lasts a short window. A television series, if you're lucky, lasts a few seasons, and records last until the next artist releases theirs. So it has been very instrumental in how I work with people and how I work with companies and how I just approach the business in general, because I understand the cyclical nature of how it all works. I also really appreciate the dynamics of the artist mentality when they're confronted often with the business issues, and the artist doesn't have the appreciation for the business issues,
right?
Or the business mentality when they approach with the artist issues, when they're looking for all this predictability, on the creative side, when, and to be able to articulate to the business people, the essence of creativity in the arts is it's not as logical, as your calculator and how you make exams. So there is a tremendous amount of faith, but to be able to articulate and to be in each room and convincingly talk the talk of the other has, even going into law school, I thought would make me a very uniquely and powerful advocate for both sides.
So do you miss it? Do you miss the stage?
See, that's the $1,000 question I always get. Let me say this. I said I stopped professionally performing. I never said I stopped the stage. Okay.
Okay.
So again, I don't go off. I'm not a professional singer. Don't do that stuff. And yes, I'm a full-fledged, all the time work artist. But I had planned to go back and perform, and I was ready to go back. My safeguard, no lie, honest to God truth, was if I fail at this, at least I can sing and dance. I'm going right back to the arts. But I never failed. I kept succeeding. The doors kept opening. And so, yes, through law school, I didn't do any of it. I was kind of terrified until I discovered kind of a singing group within law school. When I got out, I didn't do a whole lot, but I remember when I got married, I hired 22 pieces of the Hawaiian Symphony Orchestra and, had my high school buddy who was a big composer do an arrangement of Ness and Dorma.
Wow.
And I sang to my wife as she came down the aisle on a classical piece, music, or I performed at different events or different weddings and things. And so I still perform and have an opportunity to kind of get out there and do things at times that are, kind of fulfilling that creative desire to maintain my artistic side. But no, I became a lawyer. I got, really successful early on, and it has not stopped. And again, success for me, is a very, very different definition than I think, it's kind of objectively driving around in fancy cars and having a lot of money. Success for me was, just like in the arts, putting together a sustainable career and helping people and seeing those results and having fun and growing my business, year after year.
Wow. So speaking of recent successes, I know, and I read this article. I didn't know anything about Vanderpump, and you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but I knew nothing about it. I saw where my daughter had posted something on Twitter about it. And then I read the article about your representation of one of the actresses. But what struck me about what she said was that she knew you had her best interest at heart. It felt very like personal, like she knew she was going to be taken care of. And that's got to feel really good. I would think, I know in my business, when somebody tells me I changed their life, or or I changed their kids' lives, or something like that, or thank you so much, I'm grateful. That means way more than the amount of money that I made on that transaction. And so, talk to me about that aspect of what you do.
Well, first of all, I'm totally happy to talk about this because I am beyond humored by the idea that I
Send it to
became more
Darrell.
famous as a lawyer than I did as a performer.
You're a meme. You're a meme.
I was telling one of my buddies, I was like, one thing I did kind of like to do, I regret giving up my arts, and I was singing, and I'd be one of these people performing in movies or something right now. And then I said, oh my Lord, I became this meme. I've become this, high profile person. And now I've become this lawyer, which is probably more famous than 80% of my clients. So I laughed and had a fun time. But fundamentally, again, the C's you now have heard about of who I am, I've prided myself, and I've tried really, really hard to maintain a level of consistency and to build a reputation that, the same guy that somebody knew in Ohio, the same guy that someone performed with on the shores of India, the same person that was trying to go to Broadway with Carnival production, or picking up an admission to Georgetown at the Ansonia post office in Manhattan, is the same guy who sits here today doing all of this. And so for me, consistency has always been a core theme of my business. But my business model has always been having the back and genuinely having a really fundamental position of trust and integrity with the people that entrust me with their careers. And that's, for me, the differentiator that I think about every day. I tell others to think about it every day. And, again, think about this, Merle. How many Cincinnati blue-collar kids who happen to sing and dance can now become this big-time lawyer, even getting a shot to represent people? So for me, I had to have something that was not like the other. I didn't have the Beverly Hills. I didn't have the big city. I didn't have the parents. I didn't have the friends. I didn't have a lot of stuff, but I had an insane work ethic. I had, an amazing, upbringing from the standpoint of just, trying to do right. And I had this fire of what artists are always fearful of. I'm talented. I can sing. I can perform. I can do all this stuff. Or I can build businesses, but I don't have anybody who fundamentally has my back. And so I wanted to fill that void. And anybody that's allowed me to touch their lives, if there's nothing else they really, I hope got, and that's why that statement was so powerful to me, because that was nothing I've really ever talked about. And Lala is one of the clients that, I have done things for, and I just do them, talk about them. But to see that come out, for her, and I talked with her after it, I was like, my God, how, where, and why, and just thank you for even saying that. She said it was the easiest thing I did because I really mean it, and that's who you are. That just told me that the very cause-driven purpose of my practice and my life actually does get through, and that's probably why I have the business and that I have. But that's not by accident. It's intentional, and it's by design. To have the backs and to have the careers, the families, the idea of kind of helping my clients build and sustain and grow and really feel like they've got somebody in their corner. That's all I've ever tried to do throughout my entire professional career.
That's I have goosebumps. So this podcast is called Beyond Stereotypes. What stereotypes have you felt like, either personal, professional, entertainment, whatever, have you felt like you've had to overcome, or not, on your journey?
Well, that's been a ton, because, just everything that I have done, I think since the day I left, and much of what I did, getting to this place in my life, was defying the stereotypes, right? Defying, as I said early on, the stereotype of, a Midwestern African-American kid not being connected, not having the talent even to get into big schools, the stereotype of, being the angry black man. I remember that was something that I actively have made sure. And one of the things I do is negotiate aggressively But I don't shout. I don't scream. I don't pound tables. I try to win by preparation. I try to make sure people are, being reasonable and can articulate their points. And if they can't, you lose. Now, I accept, particularly in Hollywood, it ain't about how smart you are. It's about the leverage, the power. If you want what I got, young man, I don't care how smart you may be, 1,000% right. But if you want to do this job, you'll be underpaid, you'll be underappreciated, and you'll take it. And sometimes you've got to accept that because that's the dynamic. But I've always loved the idea of never letting them see me get angry, never letting them see me sweat, and being right up in their faces and making convincing points and winning way more than losing for my clients. So stereotypes of who I am as an artist, stereotypes of what people perceive to be my skill set or limitations, the stereotype is something that, I think I've lived with my entire existence. And everybody does. We kind of stereotype everybody, right? You stereotype women, you stereotype the executive that calls you. If they not look like you stereotype and make assumptions about what they are and how they're going to treat you. I think we all kind of deal with it. So I've had my share, but I actually enjoyed bucking them. For many years, even in my performances, I would read an audition for, 7 foot tall, Caucasian, chorus man. And I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to do the audition. I come back out and I go, well, how did you guys hire a 5'5" African American? Because I just see it as other people's limitations. And I've always relished, enjoyed the idea of busting stereotypes.
That's awesome. So, do you feel like because you did a wholesale change, but do you feel like there's room for your clients to kind of do a little bit of both? Not like your client becomes a lawyer, but say, is it smart for an entertainment client to have their hand in a lot of different things because they're just they just don't know where the next dollar's coming from?
Well, yes, but I think, there's a kind of a two-edged conversation. When I started out, it probably was smarter to kind of stick with one thing. If you're an actor, stay as an actor. If you're a writer, stay as a writer. If you're in movies, stay in movies. If you're a singer, stay in singer. That's kind of the world in which we all grew up, right? Much of our parents grew up and we were taught, go to school, get a job, go get a job, right?
Right.
But what we have now become, what society is today, is everything but what we were then. We are now in a society where the idea of kind of cross-selling, cross-promotion, is the flavor of the month, if you will. And not only is it easier to think about being an actor, writer, producer, and director, it's actually required more than ever before. Again, in the old days when you can go to school and get a job, that was because that job took care of you, took care of your family. You were there for 30 years, you get your gold watch, and you retired. That was the cycle of American life. Today, with mergers and acquisitions happening faster than the days are blowing by, right?
There's like one company now, right? Controlling everything.
Today, as an artist, where movies used to last for half a year. If I didn't catch Star Wars in January, I could catch the original Star Wars in June. It's still in the theater.
Right.
Today, movies are Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and the new one starts on Monday.
Right.
Right. Today, in the old days, television series used to be 26, 28 weeks, and you lived by it, and you had your summer, and you come back and start all over again with the next season. Today, this is one of the reasons we're about to see strikes potentially, is that you got 6 episode orders, 8 episodes orders. You're lucky if you get 10 in an initial order, and that might be the entire series. So artists are just not getting the kind of longevity in their jobs that they had previously. So today, if you're not prepared, not just by accident, if you're not prepared by an intentional understanding of a business plan to make sure you're generating a sustainable life, you're not prepared to do multiple things to generate multiple streams of revenue, you're not even going to live the life that you could live, 30, 20, 15 years ago, because the entire fabric of our industry and then of our society has shifted from the kind of stability that we all knew and grew up on, and that our, school system and society kind of told us to do. The other thing I discovered, Merle, is I wrote a book around 2015 called The 16th Minute of Fame, an insider's guide on how to sustain your 15 minutes. And what I did in preparing to release the book, I started studying wealth in America and just kind of researching characteristics of the wealthy people in America. Again, like, right, we all want to be wealthy. I said, you better start thinking about understanding some of the characteristics of these wealthy people. And it ain't just, the bling bling that you see on TV. It's like, what are they doing? Who are they? Right. And I started reading a ton of books and doing a bunch of research. But one thing struck me so profoundly that it became kind of a core talking point in the book, which is I found that while most of society was telling us in Ohio and the rest of America to go to school and get a job, the real wealthy people in America were actually building multiple streams of revenue, and the job was only one component of the revenue that flew into their wealthy empire. So they had a job, they had a real estate portfolio, they had investments, and most, on average, the average wealthy person had 7 streams of revenue flowing into their empire, and many, many more streams flowing for lots of other wealthy people. But the average was something. And that just profoundly hit me over the head when we were trying to get that same level of wealth and that same level of stability out of a job.
Well, and aren't they always also living below their means?
Not always, right? Not necessarily always. There was a wonderful book, The Millionaire Next Door, that talked about that.
That's what I'm talking about,
There was another characteristic to show that many of them do live below their means. But what are their means, right? At the end of the day, if you're wealthy and you're a billionaire, you could still live, an insane life. Yeah, exactly. And so it's all relative, and they don't teach you about the relativity of how it, where you are and what you do. You make your first million. I tell people all the time, you might be rolling, but you're probably hanging with people making 5. So you still can't do what they could do. You make your first 5 million. You really think you're rolling, but you're probably hanging with people that are making $1 billion, and you still really can't do what they do. But we tend to try to do those things. So I think you have to do multiple things today. You have to find ways to generate multiple streams of revenue. You have to find ways, what I call leveraging of your brand, the brand of your business, the brand of your talent. You have to do things differently because the environment and the industry, in particular the one in which I operate, but society in general, technology has completely obliterated the way things were done in so many industries, and entertainment has not been exempt from those changes.
And I'm glad you said the word different, because that's my philosophy. I mean, that's why I even started this podcast, was to have successful people explain to folks that it's okay to be different, and that actually different is good. Set yourself apart, and be who you are, be authentic. And I not enough people understand. That's what you're talking about. Also about, diversifying. Nobody's telling you exactly what they're doing. But you can be guaranteed that if they're doing really well, they're thinking outside of the box.
Yeah, and because it's really required. It's really fundamentally different. One of the other things I talked about in my book was, and this was early on, I was kind of ahead. I rolled the digital revolution, but I was thinking, I saw the changes coming, and I just said, you've got to think differently, which is a phrase I use a lot. Think differently and embrace change. Think differently and embrace change. Yeah. It's just been kind of one of my talking points for a long time, because, outside the box is where many people, particularly first generation people like myself, have had to live. Because if you're inside the box, arguably you don't exist. There's no roadmap for you. There's no path in many cases, unless you begin to carve and cut out a path. And from from the time I talked to Miss Fields, this person who opened my eyes to a new path, from the time I applied and tried to figure out how to get into schools to see if they would believe me enough to become a lawyer. And from the time I walked into Georgetown and then walked out of Georgetown with a degree and then passed the California bar on the first time and then got my first one or two clients, it's like there's no path. There's no book that I could have read. There's no mentor I could have immediately had to say that that's how you do it. I just had to have the faith, and the discipline and the clarity of vision to believe that it could happen.
So let me ask you this, and one of the other tenets of this podcast is diversity, equity, and inclusion, talking almost directly to folks of color about success. And this is kind of a two-part. It's how do you intertwine diversity or advocate for it in your job, but also what role? It seems to me there's been a role in kind of people who have been able to become Insta famous, or people who have been able to do their own thing without having to beg somebody in the system to accept them. And that has played, has benefited folks of color to some point. Am I onto something there, or am I delusional?
You're definitely not delusional, no matter what you say. You cannot convince me of that and to even think about that. You're absolutely onto something, because, again, the other thing that I pointed out long before it was popular is that the internet is a great equalizer. The internet and the ability to reach consumers without having to go to a gatekeeper of the mass marketer is a great equalizer. And if you understand how to use it, which kids from outside of Hollywood has figured out, which adults have figured out, which certain brands have figured out, that's what you're alluding to, is that people who have inherent creative skills and great ideas and kind of an entrepreneurial spirit, it used to be you could have all of that. But unless ABC decided to greenlight your show and put you on, you ain't going nowhere. Exactly. Unless, Universal Music decided to put your record out, you can sing and dance all you want in the Midwest. Unless Mr. Movie Theater decided to put it up on the screen, on the one movie screen that everybody had to go see on the weekend, you didn't even have a shot.
Right.
But the internet, and once we hit critical mass with the ability to have content communicated over the internet in real time so as to not be disruptive, it changed the playing field.
Yep. Yeah. And has that changed how you've had to do what you do at all?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Absolutely. Not only has it changed what I do, it changed how I give advice. Because while I've got clients who are crying about Warner Brothers or some major studio not hiring them in the next film, and their whole existence is measured by whether or not they get that big next studio film, what I'm going is, do you realize what your celebrity is outside of a Warner Brothers, outside of a studio system? Why don't we do something over here, smaller, but you own it, and we put it out and monetize it and make some money while you're waiting for them to make that next film? So
Amen.
One for them, one for us, one for them, one for us has been another component of my business models for the clients. If you hit certain level of critical mass, hasn't Miss Lala Kent shown you, did she wait for Mattel or somebody, some clothier to come to her and go, send it to Darrell on something and to put it out and put it in the stores and have it in magazines? That lady had sweatshirts on 24 hours later and sold 100,000 in 24 hours.
Wow. Yep.
That's the power of the internet.
Yes. Darrell, I mean, I could talk to you. I first of all, I'm grinning ear to ear. You can't see it. I'm leaning into my microphone. I'm so excited. This is I want to thank you so much. We're almost out of time here. I know you're a busy man, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. But I just want to ask you, one last, is there anything else that you want people to know about you, or you want people to think about them, that you want to impart before we're done here?
Well, we've covered a lot,
Yeah, we have.
and you have pulled a lot out of me. But if there's one parting thought I would say, and want people to take away from me, my experiences, my life, my motivation, and my work, is to truly believe that they can do anything, and that preparation and work beats smarts every day. And what I mean by that is, through preparation and the work, if there's something you look and want and desire to achieve, you have a far greater chance of achieving it, as opposed to believing just simply because you were not born at a certain status, or you don't have a certain current intellectual capacity, you can't achieve it. You really are the driver and the engine, to the dreams that you want to make real.
Wow. Wow. I am so appreciative of your being here to BS with me today, Darrell. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here to BS with me today. I think that's a great note to end on. And so I want to say thank you to everyone for listening. And until the next episode, remember that everybody is different, and different is good.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.